Honorable Speaker, I beg to move that this House adopts the report of the Committee on Delegated Legislation on its consideration of the Public Finance Management Wildlife Conservation Trust Fund Regulation 2025 laid on the table of the House on Tuesday, 31st March 2026, and pursuant to the provisions of Section 24, subsection 4 of the Public Finance Management Act, CAFO 12A, approves the Public Finance Management Wildlife Conservation Trust Fund Regulation 2025, published as legal notice number 190 of 2025. Mr. Speaker, this is another fund that is being established for purposes of collection of revenue within the wildlife conservation management, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, these regulations have been made by the CS Treasury, the Honorable John Mbadi, pursuant to the Public Finance Management Act, which gives him the power and authority to establish funds, Mr. Speaker, to be operationalized in various institutions. The Committee on Delegated Legislation, Mr. Speaker, considered the regulation in line with the Constitution, the Public Finance Management Act, the Interpretation and General Provisions Act Cap 2, and the Statutory Instruments Act Cap 2A. Pursuant to Section 16 of the Statutory Instruments Act, Mr. Speaker, the committee held consultative meetings with the National Treasury, CS Cabinet Secretary, Honorable John Mbadi, on Thursday, 12th March 2026, before we made our final recommendation after considering the regulations, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the wildlife resources contribute a substantial proportion of the country's earnings through tourism. This is because Kenya's wildlife, particularly the Big Five, Mr. Speaker, are the most treasured, unique selling point for our country's tourism sector, Mr. Speaker. The government intervention in the wildlife conservation and management dates back to 1898, Mr. Speaker, when the then British East African Protectorate enacted laws to control hunting and trade in wildlife and wildlife products. In 1945, the Royal National Parks of Kenya Ordinance was promulgated to provide for the establishment of national parks. The first post-colonial wildlife policy in Kenya was Sessional Paper number 3 of 1975, a statement on future wildlife management policy in Kenya. By the mid-1980s, Mr. Speaker, it had become clear that further policy adjustments were necessary to help address the chronic challenges in the sector, such as increased human-wildlife conflict, increased poaching, the failure to achieve integrated wildlife management approaches, and finally, the loss of wildlife population within and outside the protected areas. Mr. Speaker, in 1989, the Wildlife Act Caps Chapter 376, and later the Wildlife Conservation and Management Act of 2013, were enacted to create a legal framework for the establishment of various conservation institutions, including the Kenya Wildlife Services, the Wildlife Research and Training Institute, the Community Wildlife Conservation Committee, the Wildlife Compensation Scheme, and the Wildlife Conservation Trust, Mr. Speaker. These are some of the institutions that have been charged with the responsibility of managing our wildlife in this country. In June 2020, the national government, through the ministry responsible for wildlife, developed Sessional Paper number 01 of 2020 on wildlife policy that committed the government to designate wildlife as a strategic national resource and allocate adequate funding from the national budget, including the economic value of wildlife in the national income, accounting, planning, budgeting, promote retention of the benefits generated from the wildlife and their habitats to develop and manage wildlife conservation areas. And secondly, Mr. Speaker, it was charged with the responsibility of establishing a fund to promote wildlife conservation and management, and to promote also access to innovative and sustainable utilization of wildlife as an economic incentive and mainstream wildlife resources into the framework of the blue and green economies, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Tourism constituted a multi-agency task force comprising of the National Treasury and Ministry of Wildlife and Tourism to undertake stakeholder consultation. And Mr. Speaker, the two ministries undertook the public participation as required under Article 10 and Article 118 of the Constitution. And Mr. Speaker, the public participation memorandum was submitted to this House, and we were satisfied that public participation was undertaken as required by the Constitution. As you know, Mr. Speaker, we have a bill that is ongoing at the moment to guide on public participation. And I'm happy to report, Mr. Speaker, that various members of this House have gone to various regions to undertake public participation on the public participation bill, Mr. Speaker. The National Treasury, Mr. Speaker, prepared the regulatory impact statement in line with Part 2 of the Statutory Instruments Act, Mr. Speaker. Having examined the Public Finance Management Wildlife Conservation Fund, Trust Fund, Mr. Speaker, Regulation 2025, we are satisfied that all the necessary parameters have been met with regard to these regulations, with regard to the Constitution, the enabling statute, and the Statutory Instruments Act, Mr. Speaker. And we are happy to report and to recommend to this House that it approves and adopts our report, Mr. Speaker, as tabled on the table of the House on 26th of March, 2026. And I beg, therefore, to move and request the Honorable Kishimu, the Vice Chair of the committee, Mr. Speaker, to second.
Kishimu, go ahead, Wakili.
Honorable Speaker, as I second this motion, I want to abide with the comments that have been made by the Chair, and also take this opportunity also to thank